Welcome everyone to Honest Leadership. This is like my favorite day of the month that we get to do this. It's so fun and rewarding, and I always learn something new. And it's fun to get to interview people who I've known a long time and I'm learning new things about in the moment. So I can't wait to learn more of your story, Jill, and how you got to where you are, which is the executive director of Girls on the Run Chicago. And we are so lucky that you're spending the next hour with us. So, for those of you who are new to Vida, I think that's probably a few of you, but we'll be sending this out on recording as well. And so there will be some folks who are new to the organization. We are a leadership and career coaching company based here in Chicago with a mission to help people love their lives, which is the meaning of our name. And it was really born out of a time when Forum, my co-founder, and I were not loving our lives. We were burned out employees, management consultants, and we were like, what's next? And that what's next brought us to coaching. And I worked with a coach that my employer provided that really helped me figure out what was next for me. And that was moving into entrepreneurship and becoming so passionate about that support structure that I was like, everyone deserves access to this. Everyone deserves to have a coach and someone who sees them and believes in them and is in their corner, which is also so much of what Girls on the Run believes, and why we've been partners for, I think, going on 4 years now. There are so many parallels in what Vida does and what Girls on the Run does. Us working with adults and Girls on the Run working with youth, and we just believe in that mission so much and wish that everyone would get access to this type of support at a younger age. It's amazing how so many people that come to work with us are experiencing this type of support for the first time. So we love that organizations like Girls on the Run exist and are providing these resources to young girls in particular. So with that, I will introduce Jill. Like I said, the kind of flow of the event, we'll do maybe, we're cutting short a little bit on time, maybe 40 minutes or so of interview, really around this topic of building this next generation of leaders in a purposeful way. But we want to get to know Jill along the way as well, because the point of Honest Leadership is that while a leadership is so rewarding and exciting and you can make impact and change, it can also be lonely. It can also be really difficult at times. And so we want to hear Jill's honest account of what it is like to be the executive director of such a visible and important organization, because we know it's not always the rainbows and sunshine. There's difficult decisions and experiences along the way. And so this is really about sharing those honest stories. Welcome, Jill. We're so happy you're here. Okay, this is where I get to read your bio and embarrass you, because this is like the worst 30 seconds when you have to listen to someone telling your story. Jill Eid has spent her career growing and scaling nonprofits for increased impact. Under Jill's leadership, Girls on the Run Chicago implemented an intentional and effective strategy plan grounded in equity, resulting in serving thousands of girls annually. Before that, Jill led growth and strategy at Cradles to Crayons, where she developed their national governance and shared services models and led strategic market expansion. Jill holds a BA in psychology and a certificate in nonprofit management and leadership. She is actively engaged in community leadership roles, serving on the leadership committee for Sport for Good Chicago and the strategy committee for the Institute for Nonprofit Practice. Yay. You've done a lot of stuff. You're an impressive lady. We're going to get into it, because I don't know how you find the time. But let's rewind before we do that. So I want to start and just learn a little bit more, because I'm always curious, like, how people got interested in the fields that they're passionate about, especially in the nonprofit space or in more impact-driven roles. Like, what is the kind of way that someone gets from where they started to where they're going? It's really fascinating to me. So let's start with you. You grew up in Long Island. I know next to nothing about Long Island, except I recently discovered that there's a street called Bread and Cheese Hollow Road. Do you know this street?
I do not, but I feel like I should. I'm very sad.
I know. I found this out and I was like, well, I'm looking at Zillow immediately, because I feel as though this is a place that I need to go. But tell me about it. What was it like growing up there? What did your parents do? I actually just learned this. Your parents, did they both own it together, own a sign shop? Or
They
your
do.
dad?
My dad primarily, so my parents are small business owners. They own a sign shop on Long Island, have owned it since before I was born. But my mom really spent her career as a teacher's assistant at her teacher's aide. She stayed home with us for a couple of years and then worked as a teacher's aide for most of her career. And she retired 2 years ago, but then decided that she was going to go work with my dad. So this kind of past few years, they've been working together for the first time, which is really, really beautiful. It's been a really beautiful part of their relationship. But
That's really sweet. And I feel like the opposite of what you see, where people are like, we spent our whole lives being busy. Now we're not sure what to do with all this time together. And they're like, no, we're going to double down. I love that for them.
It's really cute. It's like very sweet because, my dad is immigrated to the United States from Egypt. And so very much an immigrant mentality in terms of work and such a strong work ethic, which can be challenging sometimes, but I don't remember ever Christmas, New Year's, Thanksgiving where he wasn't in some way working, even for just a few hours. And so for my mom to be able to be integrated into this period of life for my dad is really powerful for them. It's really beautiful to see like relationships iterate and grow.
What did that feel like to you growing up? Like, were you resentful of the fact that he was always working? Did you respect it? Do you remember having emotions around that?
Yeah, no, I have so much admiration for my dad. I think that like when I was reflecting on this question in this time of life and how things, how my upbringing shaped me, my parents always taught us three things. They taught us to love what you do and you'll never work a day in your life. They taught us to get a good education. And they taught us we had to take care of our neighbors, that it was our responsibility to take care of other people. And this piece about the way that my dad worked and showed up in the world, so much of what he did was doing work, but was also in service of other people. And so I always had this deep admiration and respect for him and how he chose to lead his life and chooses to lead his life and use his time. And he never missed the important stuff. He was at every game. I don't know how he did it, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I've been reflecting on that with my parents as well, especially now becoming a parent. And of course, you're like my daughter's really into the thing. She's 2.5 right now, where she's like, I'm going to work, and like she'll walk away and like be on her little fake laptop, and it's like I'm sending emails. I'm like, oh my gosh, is this like really depressing or is this cute? But I think about that with my parents, and they were working. They were in the Army Reserves on the weekends, and I just don't ever remember feeling negatively about that. It really instilled, I think, similarly, this work ethic and sense of admiration for them. So I think it's just a powerful reminder to myself of like releasing the guilt around those things and really showing that through your actions, you instill a lot of these things, even without the explicit phrasing around it.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally my experience.
Yeah. Okay. So you kind of see these three pillars in the way that they operated and taught you. And then at some point you decide to go to college and study psychology, which I just learned about you and it's interesting. What made you choose that? And what did you think you were going to do at the time?
Yeah. Well, I had a million majors to
Okay.
start. So I was like, I came in as a business major. Then I was a bio major, and then I was a neuropsych major. I like really ping-ponged all over the spectrum.
Okay.
But the thing that drew me to psychology, and this is like has just been, I'm fascinated by people. I'm in the like most of us are in the relationship business in general, and people are so interesting to me, and I just think that there's everybody has a story. That's the thing that I always really have found myself coming back to. Even as a little kid, I was always asking my parents or my grandparents or aunts and uncles, like, tell me about the family history. Like, what is our story? And so for me, that was when I was getting my degree. It was really this like interest and curiosity in other people's stories and what motivates them and what, interests them. And I really thought that I was, and I will become a therapist someday. I really believe that like careers are, there's a lot of different points in careers, and this is for sure not the only career I'll have. And so I think I'll go back to school and be a therapist in maybe my 50s or 60s or something. But I remember graduating college and knowing that I didn't have enough life experience to be a therapist. I just didn't. And I couldn't really hold the reality of somebody who is struggling in a variety of different ways and my lack of like life experience. And so I took a year off. I went and I did AmeriCorps, which is a service year, and that totally transformed my career trajectory, really. And so I'm so grateful to have had that experience, to have been in true service and to see communities I've never been exposed to in my entire life. very much like rural communities. I grew up in a very urban place. So that was really powerful.
Interesting. Where did you go? And how did you find out about AmeriCorps? Like, was it like you just happened into it,
Yeah.
or you were seeking a service opportunity because you were feeling like you weren't ready for that next step?
Yeah, I was looking for service opportunity. I was trying to figure out like what that looked like. And somebody else in my college had done, a couple of people had done AmeriCorps, and I did the NCCC, which is the National Civilian Community Corps. And it's a 12-month commitment where you go and live and work in communities that have self-identified needs. And so I was a team leader, meaning that I was responsible for 10 to 12 other kind of peers in the space. And that was a really interesting test of my own leadership, because a lot of the work I had been a leader before in the past, but it was always something where I was the expert, right? Like I had been my dance team captain, and I could do that, right? I had an expertise in it. But being a team leader at AmeriCorps, we were like running chainsaws and like, driving tractors, and like this little chick from Long Island who like can literally touch their neighbor's house.
Yeah.
She'd never done something like that. And so it really taught me this power of like, what does it mean to lead through and alongside people and bring out the best in others and learn from others, rather than just like trying to assert dominance by being the expert in the space.
That's such a good exercise. Like, because I think part of the problem and the misconception with leadership is that you have to be the expert, or that you're there to have the right answer, but you're not. You're there to get the team to do the thing, to accomplish the mission. So I almost love the idea of like challenging yourself to go lead through something that you know absolutely nothing about, to really flex those muscles. And I think you probably have such a natural knack for that, going back to the concept around psychology, because I think so much of what helps is that curiosity in people's stories and the time to really understand what does motivate this person, what skills can they bring, versus making assumptions, which can be dangerous. So I have a sense of that's probably what factored into your natural leadership capabilities.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think the other thing I'd add too is like the ability to create team and camaraderie. I think also has something to do with psychology and understanding how groups operate, and how understanding how to build a sense of cohesion and connection and community, because none of us do work in silos, none of us operate in silos in general, and the connectivity of a team, for me, I've found, is so important to be successful in the way that we achieve work, whether that's building a trail in Arkansas, or doing the work we do here in Chicago at Girls on the Run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. It really is that like 2 + 2 = 5 kind of thing when you can get the team humming, but that's not always easy to do, especially when you inherit a team, which I want to get to as well. But before we get to Girls on the Run, I want to learn a little bit more. So you finished the AmeriCorps experience. Like, where were you at career wise? Were you like sold on serving? Did you decide you wanted to go into the nonprofit space at that point? Like, where was your head at?
Yeah, so had this like really transformational year of service where I like built so many skills and tried so many new things. I mean, I lived in a tent for 3 months. I had never gone camping in my life, It was like a crazy life experience that I'm so grateful for.
Were you enjoying that in that moment?
Oh, I loved it until there was like, I was waking up to frost on my like sleeping bag, which was like an interesting thing. And I'm like terrified of spiders, and my team one night like just dumped a bag of fake spiders into my sleeping bag, and that was where I was like, I think I'm done with the camping vibe. Yeah, but yeah, anyway, so I did AmeriCorps. I went to school in the Boston area. I moved back, and I got a job in sales so that I could like figure out how to move back and have resourcing, but found myself really longing for community connection and purpose. And I couldn't find that. I wasn't finding that in my sales experience. And so I started volunteering. I found Cradles to Crayons, which is where I then started working. And I started volunteering there on the weekends, and felt really connected to, again, this power of community. Because I think that, there's a piece about service that it's really about what is possible when you bring together hundreds of thousands of people in service to one idea, and so or one concept or one value. And so I loved that. That's what's really started to draw me to the nonprofit space, was this idea of service. And that's where I started my career, was at Cradles to Crayons. I found a job that was opened and then applied, was a grant writer, which I think is very funny because I mean, Nicole, you've seen my texts, you've seen my emails. Like I have terrible grammar. I'm not like, I'm a good storyteller. I'm a great storyteller, but that's not usually what grant writers are known for, like their English skills, which is not my vibe. But it was really powerful. Like it was a really powerful way to start my career because I got to really understand the organization, and that kind of a role, you see the full organization and you understand the needs and you understand purpose. And so that's really what got me started in the nonprofit space, was my time at Cradles.
Because in order to write the grant application, you have to understand all the different components. Is that how you learned all those different pieces?
And you had to understand the story of the people that you were looking to support, or so to me, it was about understanding the story of the business and then understanding the story of ultimately the young people that we were trying to support and add some value to.
Did you have, I feel like when I talk to you, you have this even now where you're like, oh, I'll maybe go back to school at some point and become a therapist. Like you have a very strategic and long-term outlook on your career of like, well, I'll do this for a while and here are the skills I'll get from that, or how, like, are you always a big picture, long-term thinker, or has that evolved over time? Because I'll be honest, I had no freaking clue what I was gonna do. And still now, like I think I can have a sense of like, this is how I want my life to feel. And I think that can be helpful for folks who don't have that clarity, or that like, where do you see yourself in 10 years question? You're like, I have absolutely no idea. But I love how you think, it seems like you're always aligning pieces.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to tell you how I got into this role, and it's going to sound very strategic too, but it really wasn't. So that's why I'll back into this. I'll tell the story and then I'll kind of back in to answer your question. So at Cradles, I was a grant writer. Then I was doing corporate fundraising. And at the time, Cradles was starting to explore national expansion. And I got pulled into a conversation with a consulting firm that was doing work pro bono. And they asked about national foundation funders. And I, did some research, pulled some data. And then after that, I was so excited about the idea of national expansion that I said to my boss, hey, if the organization ever needs a national hire, or more work to be done on this work, I'd love to be part of that, even if it's not like a full-time, I'd love to be just part of the conversation. So very much raised my hand to my boss. And, over the next couple of months, it became clear that there needed to be a national hire. And so I was the first national hire to that office. So I was working directly then with the founder and CEO, Lynn Margario, who's the best and continues to be such a strong mentor and coach for me. And then I spent a long time working with her, doing a lot of really great work, and really had realized that I wanted to be an executive director. And when I did that, I was transparent with Lynn. I said, hey, I really would like to be an ED. And she spent she took that to heart. She asked me a bunch of good questions. And then together over the next 3 to 4 years, we built the skills that she built. She helped me to build skill to become an executive director. And so it was a very intentional process that led me to Girls on the Run. That wasn't just me, saying that, this is what I want to do, but really building a community and network around me in order for that to become true. So I think when I think about a strategic career decision, I think for me, it's always just been about really trying to get clear about what I want and then sharing that with other people, because it takes a village. I could never have done any of this. I can't do this work alone. And so I think, and it's this openness and flexibility to letting kind of career and life take you to a variety of different places and being really open to what that journey might look like.
Yeah, that part's so scary, the sharing, but had you not said, hey,
Oh
I'm interested in this, if an opportunity arises, no one probably would have even known to pick your hat out of the ring, and so that's so important. A friend of Vida's and mine, Audrey Boyle, once said to me, when it comes to personal branding, but I think whether it's branding or career decisions, play offense. If you want to be a writer, put on your thing, you're a writer. No one's going to think of you for it unless you declare it in that way. And I think that feels really scary because you're like, I'm not yet. But you have to make those declarations, like you said, for it to come true. I love how you phrase that. Okay, before we get to Girls on the Run, I want to backtrack kind of along the lines of the topic of today's event. but in the reverse, when we're, you know, roughly the same age, we're coming out of college and sort of the wake of the housing crisis and recession that followed. Um, and I think there was just a lot of change and uncertainty and feelings in the marketplace. And then this big kind of wave of millennials was coming into the workforce for the first time. And it felt like, you know, everywhere you looked, there was a headline about how terrible we were and how entitled we were, and all these kinds of fears around this incoming generation and whether we would be successful in eventually becoming leaders. Like, what do you remember from that time? What irked you? What did you agree with? Like, was that as big feeling to you as it was for me?
You know, it was so funny. I was talking to Mike, my husband, who started his career with Nicole. So we have many intersecting paths. And, you know, he felt that. But I think in the nonprofit space, I remember it very vividly, my friends being worried, feeling stressed, you know, a lot of pieces for them. But for me, I remember not feeling that kind of pressure because there's so much opportunity in nonprofits that, like, man, if you're hungry, you can take a lot of it, right? Like you can take out, you know, a big bite. And I do think that there was always like kind of conversation about millennials in the workplace because all of the leadership I saw around me were not millennials, but all of everybody else was a millennial. And so it was this really kind of interesting dynamic that played and often does play in nonprofits. But I don't remember being as scared or as nervous, right? Because I wasn't entering into like the traditional business world. And from a fundraising standpoint, we weren't seeing the impacts. Like, at least Cradles wasn't seeing the impact of the financial crisis in any real way. But I know how much a difference it's made for so many people who entered the workforce the same times that we did.
Did you feel that like you were being led by the old guard? Like, I think that was more what I felt, like
Oh,
less
sure.
nerves around it, but more like I'm recognizing that a lot of the style of leader that I'm working for was very old school in mentality, very like butts in seats, what like first one to show up, last one to leave, like taking vacation was not only frowned upon but like not allowed. Definitely a lot of sexism. Like I feel like there was just a lot of things where I was like, no, we're bringing the right way that the industry. And again, back to the like reflecting on how my parents were and how I now parent, I've been thinking about that a lot in terms of like my own perceptions or fears for incoming generations. And like they didn't, it feels like previous generations didn't fully understand our perspective and what we were bringing. And yet I believe it pushed everyone collectively in the right direction. And that's my hope for what, of course, is happening with every incoming generation is like, you don't understand it entirely, but it's pushing us in a direction that collectively we all benefit from.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. It's like you come with like I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this too. So many movements have been like they're started by young people. Like young people are always at the forefront of pushing the envelope towards, you know, stronger community, stronger connection, stronger values. You know, it's like, and so I do remember that, right? Like asking for something different or asking for something more, asking for things to be different. And I was grateful. Like I had a culture that there was receptivity to that. There was an openness to change and to listening to the millennial team. I think maybe because we made up the majority of the workforce.
You're like, you will listen to us. We're outnumbering you. Oh, yeah, that's funny. Well, that's great. I mean, I'm glad that it was receptive. And I think at a certain point, like we say it in jest, but like things have to evolve because it does become a bigger and bigger proportion of the voices that you're hearing. And so some companies take longer to get there. I'm glad it sounds like yours was a pretty receptive experience from the start. Okay, so you figure out that you want to be an executive director. You're kind of being groomed and developing the skills that you need. What was it that attracted you to Girls on the Run, and how did that kind of come to be?
Yeah. So when I was ready to leave, a couple of things happened. One, when I felt like I was starting to get ready, I'd built a lot of skill at Cradles, had tons of support. Two things happened. One, Cradles was hiring for a new executive director here in Chicago, which is what I had spent a ton of time building. And I spent most of my career really building up and all that good stuff. And then I also like started to get clear about what I wanted to be, what kind of organization I wanted to be an ED at. And it was very much an organization that knew how to leverage the capacity of volunteers, was a part of a national organization. I really liked that infrastructure, and really could leverage my background and my expertise in growth and nonprofit growth and strategy. And so I of course went out for the Cradles ED position, and I was the second candidate. I was the second finalist, and I remember being so devastated when I got the news that I wasn't hired for that role, because this was an organization that had invested so much in me and so much time and energy and support. And it was so beautiful, what they had done to support me in my career. And I was so sad. I was so devastated. And I got over it. And in hindsight, Girls on the Run is just such a better fit for me. It's because I think that there's some challenge that folks might experience when they grow up within an organization, is that it's really hard to shake being that young person. It's really hard to shake this experience that people see you through, the lens that they see you through as being, young or inexperienced. And it was a part of the story that was following me at Cradles that I couldn't really ever step out of fully until I stepped into a different organization in a different role. And at the same time that I found out about Cradles, this job, I came across this Girls on the Run role. And I was just so drawn to, one, the needs of the organization, like what they were looking for in a leader, and also the power of what running does for people, what running did for me in my life, and how it changed my life. And it's, man, I couldn't have imagined a better fit, right, for me. So I feel so grateful every day that I love Cradles. They do amazing work, but I feel so grateful that I didn't get that job. It was the best thing that happened to me. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. So
That's interesting about not being able to shake the kind of perception or brand that you did have in the organization. And also, I think there's a benefit to being an outsider sometimes. Like when you grow up in the organization, you stop seeing the cracks. You are so accustomed to the way things are done that it's difficult to identify the opportunities. And so someone gave me the advice, and I now take it to heart, which is like, when people join our team for the first 6 months, I'm like, tell me everything you see. Because after that, you start to become blind to it. Like that is when people are, and I think people are hesitant, and you don't want to come in like a bull in a china shop and just like, bulldoze everything that someone's doing, but that's really when you have that eye. And so that can be helpful. I think the flip side of that, and I was thinking about you still at this like pretty young age, stepping into this really big role. And I feel impostery all the time leading on Vida. I think particularly when we bring on like new cohorts of coaches who are more experienced than I am, who are so talented, so smart, have held big roles. And I feel this like, oh my gosh, this person wants to work here. Like it really takes me a minute to like be okay with that. And this is a thing that I built from scratch, that form, and it's an idea that came out of our brains. And so there's kind of comfort in that. I'm trying to imagine you stepping into this role in an infrastructure that already exists, in a team that's already there. Did you feel any of that, or were you, I'm sure you did, but what was that experience like? Or were you kind of riding on the like, wow, this is such a great fit and I can't wait to like sink my teeth into it?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I still feel imposter syndrome. I'm like, what's happening here? Like all the time. And then I remember everybody feels like everybody feels this, whether they express it or they don't. And I think, what I find is that I just say it. I say it a lot with the team. I'm like, sometimes I think like, who gave, like, what is happening here? But I still remember feeling that way coming into the role, and also feeling really hungry about the job that needed to be done, and very clear that I had a unique set of skills that this organization needed, or else they wouldn't have hired an executive. They wouldn't have hired somebody new. And so I did feel like there was this balance of trusting in my own abilities and having a sense of confidence in, hey, I can do this. And if I can, and also I think the thing about my approach is that, and this is true all across the board, is that I am not scared to ask for help. I mean, Nicole, the number of times that you've experienced me asking for help about really big things, but also really silly small things. I have no problem asking people for help or their thoughts. And the way that I've always approached my work has been doing like listening tours, talking to a lot of people, asking them, how do they do this? How do they navigate these things? And then taking the best of what I hear, what I think is applicable, and trying to apply it here. And so that's what I did when I joined Girls on the Run. I did a listening tour of a bunch of other executive directors in our space. I had got a bunch of conversations. And so there was this feeling of like, oh, can I do this job? And then there was the action of like, what do I need? What needs to be true in order for me to feel like I have the confidence and the support to know that I can do this role, and to be unafraid to ask for help along the way.
Say that again, though. What needs to be true? Like,
What
walk
needs
me
to
through
be
that
true?
part.
Yeah. Like, what do I need to feel confident? What is that thing? What is it? Just like having resources available to me in the form of expertise, or in the form of knowledge about a specific topic or lived experience. Like, what is the thing that I need to get more information on in order for me to build up my confidence in having enough data points, really, to make a decision, right? It's like, we can all, there's so much information out there. There's so much available. People are so willing to share what's worked for them and what hasn't. That all we got to do is ask the question.
Yeah, I'm endlessly shocked at how generous people are with time and ideas. And I'm similar to you in that, like, I've asked every single person I know for help in some capacity from starting this business, because you can't do it on your own. And there's something new every day that's coming up that I'm like, I have absolutely no clue how to do that. And I caught myself on it recently. I was feeling really intimidated about this technical, like, tech challenge that we were facing. And I was thinking about building versus implementing a new system. And I was like, I don't know how to do this. And so it was just kind of sitting. And I was like, Nicole, you didn't know how to do any of this before you started. Like, you didn't know, how our accounting methods or how to run a sales team. And to your point, like, when I looked at the evidence was I always figured it out because I asked for help or took the time to learn. And so that kind of gave me the confidence to, like, we're going to figure this thing out too. Even though I know absolutely nothing about how this technology is built, we're going to figure it out because someone in my network does.
Yeah.
And we'll get there.
So sorry.
No.
When I was working with to open the Cradles Market here in Chicago, my like mantra was like, there's no option but to get it done. Like, there's just no choice. Like, you have to be successful. There's no choice. And for me, like, success changes all the time. There's many different metrics, but like, there's just no choice. For me, that's like the thing that I often grasp onto is like, there's no option. There's no choice. We've got to do it, because for me, the mission is the most important part. We have to do it for these girls. We have to do it for the girls that I've coached. And, and so there is a real guiding force for me on figuring it out, that I got to get my ego out of the way, because I actually don't matter as much as our girls do. They are who matter far more than I do. And so that's also the thing that I think helps me to get out of my own way,
Yeah. That's a really helpful, number one, such a valuable anchoring. And I feel grateful that I feel so personally connected to what we do too, because inevitably as a leader, you get lost. There are days where, like, what are we even, like, I lost in why this felt like a good idea or why this is the strategy. But if you have that thing that you're anchored back to that feels that meaningful to you, it does help you remove yourself from the equation and feel centered again. But I like this idea of, like, doing nothing is not an option. So whatever your decision is, if doing nothing is not an option, you have to do something. You got to find a way to fumble through it and get there one way or another. So it's like, pick the path that's the best, but nothing can't be one of them. What's important to you as a leader? I know we talked about a little bit about your style in terms of approaching people with curiosity and really understanding on an individual level. Like, when you think about how you show up, what are your priorities? What's top of mind?
Yeah. I mean, it's not inconsistent. I'm like very human centered, right? I know that when we think about Girls in the Room program and the way that we interact with our young people, we know we teach this in our coach training. We are one part of their lives. We make up one part of their story. And there's a lot of other factors that are going on around their world. And so like, how do we make the most of our time with them? And I think about that when I think about my team. We're at Girls on the Run is a bigger part of my team's lives. We make up a big part of their experience in this world. And so how to make sure that their humanity is being seen and recognized and nurtured, and we're getting some shit done, right? It's like how to do both of those things at once. And for me, it's always been about creating space for creating space for people to be themselves, allowing for them to share that they're frustrated in an appropriate way, allowing them to share their excitement and their joy and celebrating with them, but making sure that we have that time to recognize humanity. How are you doing? You know, tell me like what's going on, right? And then we come back to like getting the work done. But I don't think for me and for my team, we can actually achieve the work if we don't navigate some of like the human stuff that might be blocking us, and how we show up. So I think that's one piece, is like very much this human-centered approach to leadership and to management. And I think the other component.
Sorry. Well, I don't want to make you lose your train of thought, but I have a follow-up question on it. Like, do you ever feel like those things are in conflict? Because I struggle with that sometimes. And I think especially being like a well-being oriented organization, it can be easy to over-index on the humanity at times. And I don't think what you're saying is that lets you off the hook to being accountable to getting the shit done. But sometimes I do find myself feeling like those things are in conflict, or if we give too much here, we're not going to achieve here.
Yeah. I think that's totally fair. I mean, I'm sure there are times where I do. Like I'm sure there are times where I'm too concerned about what, you know, how people are doing. But I think that there's also like, if I'm feeling in conflict with helping to support somebody at an individual level, I oftentimes will name it like in the conversation. I'll say, hey, like, you know, I'm sensing that like this is happening, or this is what I'm feeling right now. And also we really need to get through this thing. So like, can we do that? Can we do both? How do we do this? And so I think in the moment, in like a one-to-one way, there's, you know, trade-offs that are being made all the time. And I oftentimes just name that trade-off, like in the moment with people. And sometimes I have to like say, hey, like, okay, we've got to put this aside now. Like, and we've got to keep it moving because we've got work to do. We've got things to accomplish. And again, for me, it always comes back to, we need to make sure our programming is high quality for our young people. I do feel so anchored to that. And so it doesn't let me lose sight of some of this work.
I like that. And that's, I'm sure, really uncomfortable and a difficult skill to learn. But to what you described, like so much of what people need is to feel seen, and it doesn't even need to be an action that's taken on it necessarily. So just calling those things out in the moment, I think sometimes can accomplish that. Okay, I like that. So before I cut you off, you were about to share another part of what's important to you as a leader.
I mean, it's my style. It's like my energy. I see like some of our team is on the phone. I'm very much myself. Like I feel like that is really important. The team sees me be really honest and really open and really vulnerable. I'm very clear about like when I feel like I've made a mistake. I feel I'm very clear about taking ownership of that in conversation with folks and in action. And I think I'm like quite playful and silly. And so I think that really allows for role modeling to let people bring their full humanity to work. And folks have shared that, you know, as they've exited, like, oh, this was a place where I could bring my full self to. And that let me not have to like deal with, like, I don't have to put this to the back burner in order to get my work done. Like I can show up and do this thing. It's not a distraction, right? To me, like where I'm trying to like figure out who do I need to be in this space. You can just be yourself. And that's like an efficiency for getting your work done, right? It's not the mental or emotional load people are carrying with them as they're trying. So I think there's a business purpose to it, right? Like, I couldn't be other than this because this is who I am. Like, this is my general vibe. I'm not trying to be something I'm not. But there is like a real business reason for it too.
That's interesting. I never thought about it in that way, that like you're easing so much mental burden by getting to be exactly who you are in that moment and to feel exactly what you feel in that moment. And I think like there's so much that we do as an organization that comes down to this same kind of philosophy, which is like it's freaking impossible to measure, but you know in your heart of hearts that like doing the right thing for the person is also smart business sense.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
period. Um so now on the flip side, where you're leading a multi-generational team, you have folks who are from I mean, pretty much every age
Mhm.
that's in the marketplace right now you have on your team. What are some of the challenges you experience with that?
Yeah, I think that I'll like take a step back first before kind of answering it. So I grew up in a really large extended family, where age really mattered, like with my cousins, right? So like,
Hmm.
I really grew up in a place where you respect people that are older than you. Like there's just this real, and it was wonderful and beautiful. And so, but I took that, and I remember starting at Girls on the Run. It was the first time that that all my direct reports would be of a different generation than me. And I remember talking to my mom, who, as a teacher's aide, had a lot of teachers who were much younger than her. And I asked her, I said, "Hey, mom, what do you like? What have you seen work the best? And like, what would you want people to know? What would you want me to know?" Right, stepping in. And she had said to me, and I'll never forget, she was like, Jill, you have an expertise. These teachers have an expertise. They have a training that they're brought in here for that I don't hold. And so I respect that. And I've had a really long, like I've had a lot of lived experience. And so I've been in the classroom for a long time. And so I know these things. And so there needs to be a mutual trust and respect and relationship that gets built and developed early on. And so I remember this feeling of like, oh, okay, I can use, like, my age is an asset. Having multi-generational team is such an asset, right? We have so many different
Hmm.
people who have experienced so many different things over the course of their career that there's so much power and value in that. And so I'm so grateful to my mom for like helping me really think about this thing that I felt like I was nervous about. I felt really
Yeah.
uncertain about how I was going to navigate this thing. Um, and it's just so like it's so powerful to see all of these perspectives brought to light in conversation. But it is also difficult, right? Working styles aren't always the same. There aren't always consistency. And the thing that I've found just recently, I think over the last 6 months or so, and it's been because of other folks on the team that have highlighted it, that like, oh, we all learn work norms and we assume that everybody knows those work norms, but we never actually always state them. And so what we started to do is
Hmm.
like, how do we make the implicit explicit? What does that look like? What are our organizational communication norms? So that cross generation, because that's oftentimes I think where the conflict happens with generations. But how do we create that? How do we establish that? Like, what are they at Girls on the Run? And how do we, kind of create structure around it so that the unsaid
Hmm.
can become said and we can all be successful in how we approach it.
What's an example of one that you became explicit about?
So, we all have like different modes, right? There's email, there's
Yeah.
Slack, there's text, there's call, there's face to face, there's like a million different communication styles. And so we create a standard of like, what are each of these channels used for? So many of our kind of more senior generations were using email only and exclusively. And
Mm.
that was really difficult because it was clogging people's inboxes. And whereas Slack is like more of a kind of one-off conversation. And so, and some of our, more folks that have just recently entered the workforce were only using Slack. They weren't using phone calls or face-to-face. And so how to really adapt and be flexible around communication. Like yeah. So we kind of got really clear about how do we use our tools right now.
That's so helpful. We actually just went through a pretty similar exercise because it's the same thing. And I love how you phrase that, like these things naturally set in, but people have different relationships with them. And so being clear about what that means and what it indicates, I think is really helpful. Um, I know we're like running short on time and I have about 1,000 more questions that I want to ask you, which we'll have to do over a coffee at some point. But I want to kind of wrap things up before we open it to questions from the group on the idea of purpose and what that means. We talk about like leading this next generation to be purposeful and purpose driven leaders. And I think a lot of people think that has to mean like an impact driven way or that there's an element of altruism in it. And I think even my own relationship with that has shifted over time from when I first entered the workforce to starting Amala Vida to now. So I'm curious, like, what does that word mean to you, and what is important to you as you think about shaping purpose-driven leaders?
Well, I think, purpose means so much to so many different people, right? Like that, I think that's the first thing, is that like we don't all have a shared purpose. And so I think
Yeah.
getting clear on what our individual purpose looks like. And for me, the work that I do today, it's about empowering the next generation, right? That is my purpose at the end of the day. That is why I get up and I do this work. And that's why we have the hard and easy conversations, is to make sure that our young people have what they need to navigate the world ahead of them. Because I think the thing that we weren't able to get to, but is like our young people are our future. And I said this earlier on, but every movement, every like point of activism, every change we've made has been because young people have been at the forefront of it. The thing I'm seeing in young people today, so Gen Z mostly as they enter the workforce, is that like there's they see each other's humanity as an asset and not as a deficit. So people aren't hiding their mental health or their disabilities or a lot of the other things that they're navigating. They see it in each other and they respect it. It isn't this like, oof, we've got to hide this. This is embarrassing. This is shameful. It's like, oh, this is who we are. Like we get to show ourselves. And, I think that like what we've seen is that young people are going to be the ones that take us through the climate crisis. They're going to be the ones that like really are at the forefront of innovation and change, and they always have been. And so I think there's got to be this like, massive respect and support of our young people, because they're always showing us the way. They are always the light that guides us, and so that's about how I feel, especially when we have folks that are just entering the workforce, is that there's so much energy. They've got the skills of where we're going. They're the ones that we need to be listening to. Sure, like I have a little bit more time under my belt, but they've got the skills for where we're headed. And so it's my responsibility to nurture those skills and to make sure that they feel supported to step into leadership when the time comes for them.
I love that. It's my responsibility to nurture those skills. I think that's such a great mindset. Jill, you are such a brilliant, inspirational leader. I'm so glad we've had this time. I have a feeling we're seeing the effect of our slight tech issue earlier. For folks who are just joining now, I am so sorry. You are joining at the tail end of our conversation. There was something that said we were just starting now, but we actually started about 55 minutes ago. Good news is we will send out the full recording and it will live on YouTube as well. I know, I'm sorry, Kelly. It's good to see you. So please, we'll send this follow-up in an email tomorrow, and then the recording will live on YouTube. But we do have a handful more minutes to ask your questions of Jill. So if you have any questions, either that are just top of mind, whether or not you're just joining now or have been listening for the full conversation, feel free to start dropping those in the chat. And then at the same time, we'll also share the link to book a consultation with Amala Vida. If you've been coming to these meetings, if you've been thinking a lot about your own leadership style and really wanting to get intentional about what's important to you as a leader, how are you showing up for your team? How are you navigating some of these tricky things that, we talked about at the surface level, but actually sitting there in the room and saying those things, it's hard to find the words at times. And this is really where a coach can benefit you. And Jill is a perfect example of that, like welcoming learning on an ongoing basis. Works with coaches herself, as do I. And so it really is something that's so powerful in helping to shape you as a leader. So if you've been thinking about coaching and are not an Amala Vida client yet, I encourage you to book this free consult. We'll talk to you and pair you with the right coach on our team to work with you. And then yes, please be sure to follow Girls on the Run. We'll wrap on that in a second, but does anyone have a quick week? I think we could take one or two questions for Jill. Okay, while people are thinking, Jill, will you tell us what's going on at Girls on the Run right now? What's next, and how can we support you?
Yeah. Well, first, I also need to say that Amala Vida is the best, that our team has received coaching from Amala Vida, and they are amazing. It is like so invaluable. So just like want to double down on that. So thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
And your team for all of the work that y'all do. It's so powerful and important. We have a couple of things coming up. We've got our end of the season 5Ks. That'll be in November. So if you want to come out and volunteer and cheer our young people on as they cross the finish line, they've been they would have been training for 10 weeks to run a 5K. And I don't know if anybody here, it's tough to run a 5K as an adult, let alone a 3rd through 8th grader. So, and we're here in Chicago. And if folks are, in different parts of the country, there's a Girls on the Run likely in your community as well. So, which certainly encourage you to volunteer your time. We also
Okay, can I add 2 things to that?
Yes.
One, to Jill's earlier point about the power of community that you can make when you volunteer. I loved that at the last Girls on the Run 5K that I was at. There were a handful of people who weren't associated with an organization. They were there because they were like, I like meeting cool people when I'm at these things. And I know it's going to be like-minded folks who want to be part of the community. So if you've been looking for something fun to do that. And number 2, you're going to make an impact. You're going to help with this great event, but selfishly, it's going to be the best morning of your year to watch these girls who are so proud, who have been working up to this, who are so excited. It is the best volunteer job that you can do. So come out in Chicago, find the local Girls on the Run chapter near you. It's like the best volunteering experience you can have.
Yeah.
Okay, back to you, Jill.
Couldn't agree more, Nicole. I appreciate you. And then we have our Ted Lasso event, which is a conversation about coaching. So Nicole is one of our panelists. And we have a couple of other folks. Jackie Hoffman is a community organizer and a leader in Garfield Park. And then Edie Ramirez, who's one of our Girls on the Run Chicago coaches. And that's on November 2nd. So it's just a conversation about like the power of coaching. So it's continuing this conversation as well. And then certainly we need resources to make our work possible. So donations are always something that we're happy to accept in order to empower our mission and our work.
Jenny asked if there's a link to sign up for the event. I'm sure we can share that, and we'll make sure we share these in the follow-up email as well. And then one question from Hannah that says, thank you, Jill, for so many great insights. How do you take care of yourself as a leader? As an early career professional facing fears of being in a leadership role, it seems so stressful that you bear the pressure for decisions or that the buck stops with you.
Yeah, I think honestly, I think this job could be really lonely, like as a a CEO and executive director. And so for me, having peers, like I lean on peers a lot to kind of process and talk about the experience of the work and the burden and the kind of what you're holding on to. And I think the way that I care for myself is that I'm really clear about what I need as a person to be like operating in this world. So, I start my day every day in the same way. And it's taken me a long time to do this. Like I never thought I'd be this lady. But I have a daily reader and then I do a meditation and and I'm on my front porch, no matter the weather. So snow and all of it. So I'm like getting outside a little bit. And I know this is so silly, but having that consistent practice as a way to start my day keeps me grounded and connected to myself. And it allows for me to feel like I have the strength I need to navigate what's going to happen that day. And so I think like creating small practice has been the value for me on how do I take care of myself. So again, building community and network, therapy, obviously. I hope everybody goes to therapy, right? Like that's for sure something that I need, having a coach, having mentors. So for me, it's about the network and the community and then finding ways to take care of myself as an individual and knowing what I need. And also like taking a step back. I think that's the other thing as somebody who's the daughter of an immigrant. I'm terrified I'm not working hard enough all the time. It's like that's the big stress for me. And it's an act of like resistance a little bit to like, be like, okay, I'm gonna take off early today. I'm gonna actually take a 20-minute nap in the middle of my day. And so like understanding and knowing that I'm doing the best I can with what I have, and reminding myself that, especially when I'm terrified I'm not working hard enough.
Anne Hopkins Avery, who I met via Girls on the Run, was on the board for a long time. She said something in one of our meetings that is a mantra that I now say to myself pretty consistently, which is at the end of the day, I just say I did the best I could with the time I had today, and I close it, and that's that. And some days that looks different from others, but I think similarly, letting go of the guilt and like listening to your body of like what you need in that moment, that's definitely an ongoing journey for me. But thank you to Anne for that mantra because it gives me a lot of peace. Yeah. Jill, thank you again so much for being here. Everyone, thank you for joining us. I, again, apologize for the tech issues and confusion. We'll get this recording out for everyone who missed the front bit of it. It was seriously so much fun learning more about you, someone I've known for such a long time, but hearing this different aspect of your story and continuing to get to learn from you as a leader. So thank you for your time, for your wisdom, for being here with us today, for all of the work that you do in the community and with Girls on the Run. We're just very grateful for you. And thank you to everyone who joined us on the line today. It was a great one. Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Nicole.